Welcome to the stream. There we go. My mute did not unmute me. Well, welcome. I'm excited to have you all be part of this stream again. So, looking forward to seeing what we're going to be focusing on. So, this is a handy dandy little web page for us. So, this is obviously ZBrushCentral.com. Okay? So this is a great site for you, the user base, obviously to share your work, but get tips, get tricks, get ideas, have an interaction between all of you around the world. We're all sitting in an office space, right? So we definitely want to make sure you can communicate with each other. So there's some things on here I want to share because this stream today is going to be really about rendering. It was brought up in the last stream. So before I start really diving in close, I know you guys can hear me now. Hey Black Scorpion, how is the overall audio quality itself? I know I'm loud, so I want to make sure I'm looking at my mixer and making sure I don't spike on your ears as little as I can. So everyone is good, can hear me. Give me the old thumbs up or good to go. All right, so this is what we have, so I just want to adjust my autos to make sure you guys are good to go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm getting some people saying it sounds like I'm in a helicopter. Other people are saying the audio is perfect. It's too loud. Dr. Pixels. The loud strange. I'm using a headset today, so I wanted to try using a headset today to just limit the sound as much as I can. So here is where we're at. So we're on the Pixologic site. So again, ZBrush Central. So some things that we want to look at, for example, is rendering something like this. So this is straight out of ZBrush. Okay, so this is a ZBrush render with BPR. So I'm going to be going through, like today we're really going to probably be able to get through most of the majority of the basics understanding. That's why I'm saying this could end up being a two-parter because getting more advanced like this render is very different, okay? So, but this is an example of what you can do in a renderer inside of ZBrush itself. So this is a great example for something like this. Or, if you're a hard surface person, having renders like this is another thing that this is straight out of ZBrush. So I want to cover, how can I render like this inside of ZBrush? And specifically, obviously, if I'm rendering organic compared to hard surface, you might want different results. And in fact, I'm going to pull this car up inside of ZBrush and then just show you ways that you can render something hard surface and compare it to something organic, right? So, but you need to have a basics understanding of what you're going to do and how you're going to be able to render things. So I want to start with just a simple scene in here. So looking at this little gorilla that I sculpted a while ago. Okay, I'm going to be living in a couple palettes here, i.e. menus. So I like to, when I render personally, I like to have both my trays open. So I like to have my left tray and my right tray open. So just this icon right here that I'm hovering over here, I'll turn on the magnifier. This right here. If you double click that, that'll open the left tray. And then of course the right tray is usually open by default. Alright. So I don't want the brush palette. We're not dealing with the brush. So I'm just going to click this little icon in the top right and drag it off. I don't know why I'm whistling today, but I'm whistling today. So, when it comes to rendering, there's going to be 3 palettes that you're going to have to live in because rendering isn't just about, okay, click and I get a render. There are a lot of things you have to do. Rendering for me, I think, is like, it's like a wall of levers. And you're just pulling on levers sometimes and doing a lot of experimenting to see what you can get to. So the point of this stream for me to you is making sure you have the basics understanding so you have to do less of that lever pulling, okay? Because I want you to be able to get to where you're trying to go as fast as you can. Okay? So here we go. I'm going to use the render palette. Okay? Is going to be one that I'm going to use for sure. I'm going to use the light palette. Okay, so I'm just going to just click these little icons and then dock them over here. I'm going to close the tool palette. And then of course we're going to need materials. Okay, so these three palettes, i.e. menus, are the ones that I'm going to live in right now and kind of put them all together and show how they work together. Okay, because this is going to be an important process for us. So in ZBrush, there are two types of renderers. There's a best render, which is the old school original render. And then there's BPR, which if anybody's ever rendered something inside of ZBrush, most likely this is what you're going to use, is a BPR render. Alright, so this button right here is BPR. I'm going to move this model up a little bit based on the, and smaller. I'm just looking at the stream so you guys can make sure you see the render. Okay, so the shortcut for this is Shift R, right? So from here on out, when I say I'm going to render, I'm going to be rendering with that shortcut. I never come over here and press this top button ever, really. I just hit Shift R to start rendering things out. Okay? So, three things that become important to us. Number one, the lighting, which works with what material, which then works on your render settings. Right? So the first two are going to be your most important steps, is what kind of lighting am I setting up and what kind of materials. Okay? That I'm going to set up. So right here you have a lights in the lighting system. So this is one light system. I'm going to show you guys today another lighting system. So this particular one, you can have 8 lights total. Right? And then this is working with your material. So the thing to understand right now is when I click on this material tab here, right, it pulls and opens up your material palette. It's the same thing if I click over here, right? So it's the same button. In essence, this is like the standard UI is kind of like a custom UI that we put together. Felt like, hey, these are the features you're going to use a lot, all right? So the thing first to understand is the materials, right? So these materials along the top, which are matte cap materials, and then there's standard materials on the bottom. So you can see there's a section for standard and a section for matte cap, and then there's a quick pick as in what materials have I been clicking a lot, right? So if I want to make this guy look gold, sure, he looks gold, right? And I go ahead and I re-render, and then boom, like that, it re-renders, and then there's a reason for that, okay? But the big difference that you have to understand is the matte caps themselves, the lighting information is baked into the material, right? So no matter what matte cap I click to, how I'm moving this around and looking at it and the way the lighting is, it's inside the material. It's inside the material. Okay? So, for an example, over here in my lights, this little orange dot right here, okay, that represents the light that's turned on. I know there's one light turned on right now because this is the orange little square here compared to the rest are turned off, right? So as I move this, you can see this icon just updated to the selected material, and there's nothing happening on the model, right? But what's going to happen now is if, again, I go to render, okay, so I do the old Shift-A-Ru-R, it's rendering some shadows again, and you can see now the shadows are different. They're kind of protruding out a different direction. So it's because I moved this light, i.e. a key light, to the right a little bit. So the light's sitting more like over top of him, like where my hand is. It's sitting more above my head now, right? And a little bit more to the side. So that's why the shadows are projecting the one way. Now, if we switch to a standard material, here we'll go with some of the little specularity, okay, and now click on this dot, you'll notice that the lighting is also updating on the model itself. Okay, so this is really important because if you're going to start rendering something out in ZBrush and you want to start playing with the renders, and again, there's a lot of things now we can do in ZBrush's render. This is a popular method for people too that are concept artists that are using ZBrush for concept, because I can just click and get a quick bunch of renders out of ZBrush, throw them into Photoshop, and then go. So which, you know, we could get to for sure in these streams. So the difference obviously is the standard material allows for the interaction with the light, where the matte caps don't. So no matter where you move the light, nothing's going to happen to your model when you're using a matte cap. Where the standard materials, you're going to have true, the light's going to update correctly based upon the material attributes. So for me personally, I very rarely use matte cap materials when I'm going to go and do a final render. For the majority of the time, I stay with standard materials. Like there are times where I will grab a matte cap material because it's just easier to maybe get like a gold, like for this instance, or there's this shiny material. I really like that shiny material and I want to use it. Okay, so this lighting is very important. Okay, so for me, something that I want to start off with, let's do a little key light so I can move this around and kind of see how the light's going to be. Right, so this is one light, and now below here you have a color. So this is the color of the light. So if I click on this and make this red, you can see he becomes red because now the light itself is red. So if I click on this and put it back to white, now the light is in essence white, i.e. no color. You have an intensity slider here, right? So as I adjust this, it makes the light less and more intense. Realistically, if we're trying to capture something more like real world, the intensity here is probably best to stay at 1 and lower. Very rarely do I really start pushing it way up. There's only one instance that I'll maybe push the intensity way up, which I'm about to show. Okay, usually I like to keep this because I know I'm going to add more lights into my scene. So if you guys are bumping up the intensity, you're going to wash out your model and it's not going to look as good, right? It's going to lose the detailing you're trying to show. Right, and then below here is an ambient slider and a distance slider. We're going to get to these two. And if I open up these light properties, you can see that this particular light is casting shadows. And you can see the button next to it is SSS, which is for subsurface scattering. Right, which for us, if we're doing something organic, that subsurface scattering is going to become very important. Right, it's something we're going to definitely want to have. Okay, so we are now got one light in the scene. The intensity is at 0.7, i.e. I would say 70%. Okay, and then I would go with having the ability then to make it go to shadows, yes, and then now I want another light. Okay, so I'm going to click on this icon right here. You'll see that the dot changed. So if I click on here, the dot goes back up here. When I click here, the dot comes down here, and you can see this little white border that's now highlighting this right here. That's showing the light that's selected. So if I click here, you can see that's now the selected light, right? And I can go through now, you can see that's the selected light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to click again, and that turns the light on. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to turn this into like a rim light. Okay, I want a light coming from behind. Okay, and I want that light to have some color. Do I want a cool light, or do I want to have maybe a warm light? So this is where the color then is going to come into play. Right, so I'm going to click on this. Let's just start with a nice cool color maybe first. And I'll go with that. And so now we've got this light is the selected one, and I'm dragging it around. You can see it updating, right? In the torus, you can see that light is now shining from this direction up. And what I want to do is take this little dot, and I'm going to click on it, just tap on it. Okay, and by me tapping on it, I've just changed the light to a rim light. So in essence, the light's now behind the model. Okay, so you can see as I move it around, that light's not coming forward, right? It's only now acting as a rim light. No matter where I go, see, it's only highlighting a certain area. So this is an example where maybe I do punch up the light a little bit to do this. Okay. To your question, 6.0, I can't say if you'll have the ability to use the gizmo to have the lights interacting. Right now, this is what the only thing you'll be able to have is the little dot to be able to interactive. Okay. So now that we have this, I'm going to say, all right, let's put it there. I'm going to go a little bit more of a warm light. I like kind of having this model have a little bit more of a warm look to it. So let's maybe go a little bit towards the yellow a little bit more. Just, yeah, give it a little bit more nice shine like that. Okay. And then this light is not casting shadows, which I'm okay with. Right now, the only light I want to have casting shadows at this point is this first light, which is my i.e. key light. And then when I render out, this is what we get. So this next part that I'm about to get into is a Lisa needs braces moment. Okay? This is definitely, look up here, right? So the shadows is going to be crucial. It's what's going to make something, you know, how it's going to stand out. Like this right now, it's very crisp, hard shadows. I want to soften my shadows up or just change the way my shadows are looking. Okay, so this is a render attribute. Right now I've changed the material to a basic material so I can see the lighting updating as I'm moving the model around, right? And making sure that that light interaction's happening on the model as well. Okay, and then now I want to come and affect my shadows. So what I'm going to do is come over here now into my render palette, and I want to change the BPR shadows. Okay, so by default, what you load project-wise or tool-wise, you're always going to have shadows turned on for rendering. So right here, there's a render properties. So I'm going to click on this, and then you have shadows. And you can see that swatch right here. You can even change the color of your shadows. So yes, why wouldn't I want red shadows? Go be red. Amazing. So it definitely can show you where your shadows are landing, right? So, and the beauty here is I can change the color, click again, and you can see how much faster the render got. And there's a reason for that. We actually are storing your shadows in memory for you. And as long as you don't do a major shadow change parameter, i.e. if I change the positioning of the light, or what we're about to get into now, the shadow parameters themselves. Like if I'm just changing something like a color, or even if I want to, you know, let's try a different material, let's try the metal material and render with that, you can see the render happens really fast. Okay, so it's like within less, on my machine was like less than a second, and I got the result I wanted. Okay, so these are just simple things, right, that I'm doing. So me, I don't like to have a pure 100% black shadow. Okay, that would make more realism not having pure black, right? So if I want pure black again, so you can see how we can see the shoulder here, and then I click and see it really pushes that back. It's very, very dark, right? And I'm gonna, let's change our document color actually, so just things stand out even more. Let's change it to like a white. Okay, so me, I like to kind of get a little bit like dark, but kind of more like a dark gray shadow. Okay, so this is just going to help me get soften my shadow up a little bit. Okay, there are other parameters that we're going to be able to do here, which we're about to get into. Okay, so down here you have BPR shadows. Right, so this is again very, very important. This is a Lisa needs braces moment. Right, so what I'm about to teach you in here or talk to you about in here, this is going to, information is going to spread into AO, i.e. ambient occlusion, and it's going to go into SSS abilities. Right, so this information I'm going to give you is going to stretch across 3 multiple facets of rendering with inside of ZBrush. Okay, so the first 2 sliders here are your floor strength. Right, so this is just in essence an opacity control on the floor. So the shadow that's casting on the floor, because I have the floor turned on right here, with it on, okay, my positioning, it's going to cast on the floor, right? So when I render this, I know I'm going to get a shadow casting onto the floor. All right, this is just controlling the opacity. So if I drop this, let's put it at 0.5, pretty much halfway, right, 50%, and I re-render again, you can see those shadows, just the opacity knocked way down. What's up, Mr. Sanson? Okay, so that's all this slider is, you know, I don't want the shadows to be so strong, right? So this is kind of like if we went back here and we put this color black back to pure black, right? And then I render this out, the shadows will get darker. So if I put this back at 1, and then re-render, you can see how dark they can get, right? So I just, if you don't want to change the color you're shadowing, right, you can just come in here and say, those need to be a lot softer, that's better. So of course the one next to it, the G strength, G strength, is involving the model. So it's looking at the model and looking at that shadow strength. So if I put this back at 1, okay, we re-render, you can see this got dark to the point where you can't even see now the shoulder there, right, of this gorilla. Like, it's gone. Okay, so I definitely don't want that. I definitely want to knock this down and re-render it. So I want to make sure I want to be able to see all the model, right? Because I don't want it to be just completely blacked out in this case where you can't really see much. So I'm just going to start with this. This looks good. I'll go with a 0.7 on the ground, and I'll go with a 0.5 in the model strength itself as the opacity. Again, it's like an opacity slider. So the next 2 sliders are so important. So I don't know what you got to do note-wise or whatever it is. Okay? Everyone look up here. Look up here. Okay? The raise and angle are going to be very important to us. So if I just drop the raise, even just put it at 1, and then put the angle at 0, and I go, okay, render, right? There you go. That's what I get, right? So it looks exactly the same because it pretty much is exactly the same. Okay? There's not really a change if I make this raise even go to 30 right now and I hit re-render, right? You're going to see the shadows. They're not really changing. They're staying exactly the same. So this is what I'm saying. This information is really important because this is how you're going to start getting more realistic renders if you want to go down, okay, down the strength. Yeah, and the G stands for the geometry. You're right on it. But it's more fun to say G strength. So, but Dosh, you are correct. The G is for geometry. Okay, so the rays are going to work in, they're married, they're together with the angle. These 2 sliders are probably the 2 most important sliders when it comes to shadows. This is what's going to make your biggest difference in your shadows. And as long as you have an understanding of these, you're going to start pushing your render the way you want it to go. Like if I'm trying to make something more cartoony, as an example, right? More toon shading. Number 1, I'd probably want shadows like we have. And in fact, I might even do want the strengths all the way up because I want the shadows to be really dark because I want it to look cartoon or a toon-like. But the problem is my material doesn't look that way. So this is why I'm saying there's a marriage between what we're doing with the lighting, how does that interact with the material attributes, and now we're just messing with render settings right now, right? So here a quick 101 for toon shading. You guys, you know what? We're going there. We're going. We're doing it. Tangent alert. Okay, so if I want to make this material or this model look a little bit more toon-like, okay, this is all I have to do. That is a material change. So the material that's on the model right now is a metal. And I want maybe, let's even switch to basic material, okay, and then I'm going to re-render. And I know the render is going to happen fast because I didn't move the model and I haven't changed any other parameters. Right? I just did a material swap. So now I can get a fast render. Right? And all this information is going to help you people with trying to get maybe a nice render that looks clay-like. Because I think every time when we make models, it's great to see renders where you've got the finished piece, but you got a nice clay render so people can really see the sculpt that you did too and make it stand out. So in the material palette, I'm going to open up the modifiers, which again, it looks like a cockpit. Right? It's going to be like, holy moly, there is a lot of information here. Right? So my goal in this stream is trying to chisel away on this. It looks so daunting, confusing for you to just say really realistically, it's actually quite simple if we look at this. And number 1, if I want to make something look a little bit more like a toon shade, all right, there I'm going to use probably these 3 attributes right here: ambient, diffuse, and a specularity. Okay, so number 1, if I just turn off the spec, the model no longer has any specularity happening in the material, right? So it's just very dull, right? So if I turn up my specularity, right now he's really shiny, right? This is now looks more like a wet wax now. I'm starting to go more like a wet clay look, right? Compared to dropping the specularity way down. Obviously it gives it more of like some kind of rubbery, starts to go towards that rubbery mold feel because there's no specularity there as much, right? So I'll just keep this at 10 for now, just so there's some kind of specularity, right? And our diffuse is just playing with the diffuse of the model's material and poly paint. So obviously I put it at 100%, I'm saying give me full diffuse, right? So I'm going to say let's go with that, and let's change the color of him. Let's go, yeah, let's go with a purple. I don't know why. Let's just go with a purple. Okay, so let's go with a little bit lighter purple. He's a little too purpley. There we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do next is in this diffuse there is a curve right here. As you can see, there's one right below the specularity. Okay, so I'm going to open that up by clicking on it. And you can see there's a graph line going from obviously the left to the right. Okay, so when I click on this, this is in essence clipping the diffuse, right? You can see it's narrowing the diffuse, so I'm getting way more dark and only a certain section with that nice purple compared to if I now go the opposite direction. Now see it's doing the opposite. I'm just getting crazy. And you can see it's already starting to look a little toon-like, right? So what I'm going to do is delete that dot. Okay, so to add a dot, you guys just click on the graph. And by the way, this information, okay, is another moment for you. This is what I'm giving you right now. It stems across anytime you see a graph inside of ZBrush. So clicking on the graph gives you a dot, and then you can move that dot wherever you want by just clicking and dragging, right? This dot has a roll off to them. So you have a roll off setting to go wider or tighter. Okay, you can see that this has got a slow transitional dot to it, right? If I drag out and drag back in, it becomes a harsh point, right? So you can see it's going more of a harsh. So if I click and drag back out and drag back in, it's now more rounded. So to show that again with the magnifier, I got the dot here, I click, I drag out, I drag back in. You can see right there, it's getting very sharp. If I click here, drag back out and drag back in, it's now rounded, right? So you get a more of a arch going there. Okay, so I'm going to click on the dot and drag out and then let go. And that's going to delete the dot. Okay, so if I want to go something more tuned, the easiest thing for me to do is in the diffuse channel, I want to come here to this strength and put 1. And you can see right out the gate, I now start to have something that's already starting to go down the path, like it's only got 2 shaded values in it. It's got this purple, okay, and it's got the dark, right? So you can see the spec. If I turn that off, it gets really flat, right? So if we re-render this now, this is what we're getting, right? And of course, we've got a colored light in the scene. So in essence, that light, how's it going? Welcome to the stream, right? So you can see that light in the back. It's giving us a little bit of that color right in there. So realistically, I could change that light to any color I want, right? And I know right now I'm going to get this. So what I want to do also to this diffuse, we'll turn it up we'll turn up a little bit more. I'll go 90. And I'm going to turn the ambient off. So the only thing I'm using right now is the diffuse. So the only thing that's turned on right now in this material is diffuse. There's nothing else on. So this is just the model, right? And looking around, I can see what I have, and then I'm rendering it out. How's it going, useful idiot? It's so strange to say that username. Funny username. I like it. Okay, so what I want to do is am I going more for Johnny Quest type of tune, or am I going for something else? Okay, so right next to the strength, once you turn that on, there's the steps that come alive. And I'm going to say 3 steps, and you can see now there's 3 values here. Okay, and so now we have this look, right, to our model, and then I can render that out, and now I've got kind of this stepping pattern looking, and then now I've also got that light. So right, if we turn off this secondary light right now, I'm going to click it and then turn it off. Now we'll just get the one light being used with the with the material that has a stepping to it. Okay, so this is obviously the first step. So the type of shadow I want comes on play in this, right? So if I want something that's looking like this, I'm going to want a shadow that is probably strong and sharp, right? That's my goal. So probably the best thing for me is keep my rays at 1, keep my angle at 0, and have both my strengths turned up. And then I'm going to render that out, and I'm going to get this scene, right? This is what I'm saying. Understanding the shadows are important. Yeah, limitation limit of the 80s, right? Johnny Quest, Looney Hanna-Barbera days, the old school days for us that grew up in the 80s. Now we're spoiled with our cartoons. Well, not really. There's a lot of 3D cartooning going on, which is great for us. Okay, so the other thing now I might want to do is tell ZBrush is not only do I want the shadows to be on, but I want them to be flat shadows, right? So you see the shadows are off, shadows are on, and then there's a flat shadow mode. So this is really making sure that that shadow kind of has a very flat tone to it, right? And you can see it got a lot sharp, more sharp. Like it's really very flat now. Okay, it looks like a cutout of a piece of paper. Compared to if I turn off flat shadows and re-render, just watch just a little bit right on the floor. See, there's a little bit of softness now along the edging compared to the other one, right? It's very subtle, but it's there. Okay? So to your question that Mr. Sanson's asking, is it sometimes the light you want to go back to the initial position? Is it possible to reset the light or its position? No. The light is, there's no way to reset this light. So if I'm moving this light around, right, I can't put it and go back to its original position. You could save out the light, of course, and then load it. So like if you got a light scene that you really like and now you want to go play with it, you could save out the lights and then reload the lights if you wanted to. Obviously that is a possibility. But right now, no, not in this can you put your light back where it once was. Okay, so let's go back now and shift gears back to, let's put this material back to normal. Okay, let's have a little bit of that. Let's have a little bit of ambient again, and let's throw some spec on this. So we have some specularity on the model, and let's throw that light back on that I turned off. Okay, and we're going back to gray. Okay, let's go with a gray. It's maybe a little too dark of a gray. I'm going to go a little bit lighter. There you go. So right now, the material itself has got gray values, and then the poly paint information's got gray values, right? So the material itself can also have information in it besides just the paint. Now, back to the shadows. Now, what becomes important is, let's say we set our rays to 30, okay? And let's keep our angle low. So let's put it at 5. Okay, so this is, the rays are starting to go up, and my angle is going up a little bit. Okay, so if I re-render this, you're going to see a change in my shadows for sure. Okay, and you can see it kind of looks like there's multiple shadows happening. Okay, so what's happening here is we are telling the lights to have 30 rays on them, right? And then there's an angle of 5 degrees. Okay? So what's happening here is I am telling the light, let's just say again, it's hanging above, right? We've got a light that's casting and it's going to create my shadows. So think about an open light source. So here we'll do it even a little bit in ZBrush. Let's have a little ZBrush fun here. Let's go into my tool palette actually, and let's grab the simple brush and say, yeah, I don't want to go that big. That's crazy. All right, and let's throw a nice little alpha on that. Okay, so we got, yeah, there you go. Okay, we've got this light sitting in the scene. Yes. Try not making fun of my art. I'm an artist. There. It's got, it's got a cord. It's got to be plugged into the wall. It's essential. Okay? And then you've got a model, right, sitting in your scene through here, right? Yeah. Right? And this light is casting out information, right? Or lighting information, or per number, if you're used to that vocabulary, right? And then now what's happening, here let's go with a different color, is we're casting rays from that light, right? So when we started this conversation, I was only casting one ray, and now I've turned it up to 30 rays. So if we switched color, so the purple, let's say, was the single ray, and now we've got green, okay? So that's also casting out, all right? But then what I've done is I've added an angle. So what that means is I've added a degree change. So do I want an angle per number in essence change? What angle do I want the lights to be cast out from? Right? So I'm clipping it by saying I only want 5 degrees. So in essence, in this orange little triangle that I've drawn here, instead of having this wide from here to here of a casting of the lighting, I'm only allowing this. So what's happening is the green ones now, I've got 30 of them that can cast out, right? But they can cast out in multiple different angles. Okay, so that's why, I love that because I'm drawing on the document that this is showing me, it looks like a little sketch in the thumbnail image. That's awesome. Okay, so this is what's happening. Okay, so if I erase this, and let's go ahead and grab my model again. Let's draw that out. Put in T for edit. Let me make sure you guys can see the render on your side. Okay, and then render this out again. Right, so again, we're allowing a angle, okay, for the rays to cast through. So if I'm looking for, say, a shadow that's still pretty dark in the middle, but then has multiple kind of stepping going on along the edging, I now know I need to have my rays turned up to, to a somewhat higher setting, a little bit kind of low mid-range, like probably I would say 50 and lower, and then the angle being really small, right? So this is important, right, to understand that. So if I now say, okay, let's double the amount of rays, okay, and then re-render that, number one, your render will start to take a little bit longer because now I'm casting more rays and more bits of information in the render, right? So all I'm doing is creating more rays, and you'll see through here, the stepping eventually will start to just become blurry, right? So if I start and then continue, let's just say doubling this for the sake of discussion, right? Now that edging, I'm still going to have really dark shadow in the middle, okay? And then the edges are going to start getting a little bit more soft, but you can see the rendering is taking longer. But now my edging is getting a little bit more soft and a little bit more soft to it. So with a really high rays and a low angle, you're going to have a shadow with dark interior and then start blurring along the edge. Okay? Having rays down all the way, an angle all the way, is going to give you a super sharp, okay, render to the shadows. So to the question that's coming in right now, what gives you your render samples is your render quality is this SPIC slider right here. So by default it's set to 3. So if you just even turn this off to 0, you're now just rendering a lower quality your rendering samples in essence, and you're not going to get such a clean render. And i.e., we don't anti-alias the render either. So this is a great way to mess with things. Okay. So by default, set to 3. It can go to 7, and that's just going to up your render quality, in essence, your render sampling as well. That's going to give you better performance. Okay. Well, depending on, KeyShot's an actual realistic renderer, right? And their only thing is rendering. So they have things like ray tracing, caustics. ZBrush doesn't have that. This is more about getting a nice render out that you can get something that's really great for concepting. You could start, definitely you can start going photorealistic a little bit down the line here with the ZBrush, but you're not going to be able to get to certain things that you can do in KeyShot. Upping the rays, I'd still say the rendering is not going to take as long in ZBrush as say KeyShot. When you start upping that quality setting in KeyShot, your render could take hours, right? If not longer than that. Okay, so hold on, I'm just catching up on a question that was asked. So yes, as you can see, some of you are already using the new version 2020.1.3. This update just fixed an issue, obviously with a lot of you working from home. Some people in studios, they're using a remote desktop and they aren't able to have pressure sensitivity because of remote desktop. So we found a way to fix that and get around that. So that's what 2020.1.3 is fixing. And then number two, it fixed there was a same pressure issue with people that had like Surface devices, a device like that. They were losing pressure sensitivity because of a recent update to Windows as well. That's all 2020.1.3. We just wanted to get it out because we know everyone's working from home, and the people that are in a studio working in a remote desktop really need, obviously, to be able to work in ZBrush with pressure sensitivity. So that's the only thing that's in 2020.1.3. So Pedro, to your error, that can be a lot of things. I can't give you an exact problem. I would create a support ticket and then let us jump on and get with that. Okay. And then to SM Mongoose, the question that you were asking is a toon render like this. When I was doing a toon render, wouldn't most people use in case of rendering an animation rather than a still frame? Well, no. If I'm making artwork, right, and I just want to say this, for example, this artist, they're not animating, but they wanted to have more of some kind of special type of render toon. So this is all out of ZBrush as an example. Right, so you can see the shadows. They went obviously with a little bit harsher shadows. There's a black line going around the part to give it kind of like that inking look, and then the materials, right? But there's what it looks like as far as that goes. So there's going to be times where I don't want, right, to have. I'm not doing it for animation purposes. There's a whole bunch of different types of rendering, right? You even do something like this. I'm just trying to make a still image and get approvals of an artist. I want to get this and get a render like that out of ZBrush, right? And this is the kind of stuff that you're going to be able to start to do inside of ZBrush, is just get renders that can give you a cool look, right, to it. So there's just different ways to go about it. So I don't do animation, but a lot of times I would want to try and get, a render like something more like that would be fun to get, right? So this is, give it a little bit more of a drawing look, sketchy look a little bit more. So it's just a little more fun having the render that way. So that's kind of where the route I'm going down, is what I can do with the render. So, but it's a great question to ask. So is there a material to simulate darker skin? No, but there's ways to do that. That's going to be a combination of the poly paint, the painting that's on the model, or the texture that's on the model, then picking the right material, and then getting the right subsurface scattering. Right? So when we get into this, Hannibal, we'll maybe help you out when we start getting to more parameters. Okay, so here we go. So besides this, another thing I might want to do is I might want to have the raise up and the angle up. So I've now opened up that angling and I've added more rays. So this is going to start making very soft shadows, right? So the shadows are almost like disappearing on the floor. Okay, and you can see that there's a lot of stepping happening, and you can see what's happening through here. So I'm going to go now and drop this strength down again. So I'm going to put these back down. I'm going to say 60% and re-render those. Okay, so I just softened up my shadows. I'm going to go a little bit stronger on the geometry. Okay, And now I want to go up actually and raise. So I'm going to just start with, I'll just double this. So it's kind of, again, like I said, rendering sometimes is pulling a lever, right? So I started at 50. I don't like what I'm getting. So for me, I kind of like will sometimes just double that setting and then see what I get. But I have to have an understanding what these two sliders are doing together in order to do this. Okay, so I don't like the angle I have, so I'm going to cut it in half because I'm losing too much of the shadow. So I don't want that opening to be so big. I want it to be a lot tighter with more rays in it, so my shadow C will get a little more pronounced. Right? And then the more rays I keep adding, right? Yes, the longer the render may take, but it's really not that bad, okay, to do this. And to the question about how to get outlining on a render, there's more than one way to do it. I'll show you a material way that you can go about doing it, and then you can just do it with a filter, right? So you can see the shadow now I'm starting to get is a lot, it's soft, but there's still some, volume to it. I can say, okay, let's go a little bit lower angle with more rays, right? So there's a relationship, right? When I went all low, very harsh, okay? When I went raise high, angle low, it was harsh with starting to having a blur around that harshness, and now I'm playing with having a very high raise and like a lower angle to create kind of like a softing shadow. And if I want to go with a very soft shadow, then it's the raise and the angle need to go up. So it comes down to what is it I'm trying to render, and that's important. That's why these two sliders are so important to me, is because this is what's making my scene come to life, right? Is the shadows at the render time making it look correct. And it all comes down to, well, what is it I'm trying to make? Now, to the question at hand for the line and outlining render. So in the material palette, okay, so right now we are in this material, right? So right now I'm just in a basic material, right? And you have multiple controls here, right? So there's a modifiers. So in essence, that's modifying the material. Within that material, you got 4 shaders. So think about this as layered materials is what you're going to be able to do. And this is a little more advanced, right? This is how we started to get, so I think I went over top of it. Yeah, I went over top of it. How I would get maybe a little bit more starting to go down the realistic, the material attributes start to come into play, and how I'm doing with the materials. So over here there's a mixer, and then down here there's a posterize, right? So you got a posterize, but right below that there's an outline. So if you turn that on, the material itself now has an outlining on it. Me personally, I don't do it this way anymore because of what we've changed in the material attributes, right? And then you got a depth, so the lower you go, right, has a different control. So you can see the variations you can get here just by changing this simple depth slider, right? And then now that outline is there, right? So this is in essence the material attribute of allowing you to do this. So I allow to mess with this on the material. I'm mixing now this outline in with the material above, right? So let's do this. Let's crank up our ambient and turn down the fuse all the way to 0. Let's have no specularity. Okay, and let's even just change him to white, right? So realistically now, all you were seeing is the mixer's cavity, right? And the depth that you want to have. This is what's giving me this look right now, right? Because I've pretty much turned the material off, right? Obviously besides the shadows right now, right? Because I've turned, in the modifiers, I've turned everything off but the ambient. I'm just like blasting this now with pure ambient, okay? And in fact, this is a great way, okay, if I turn off this outline, this is a great way just to see your shadow pass by itself in the ZBrush scene. And I do this all the time when I'm messing with my shadows, and I need to just really focus on what are my shadows looking like, this is a great way to do this. Right? So all I've done is I've taken the standard material and I've turned everything off and turned my ambient all the way to 100. So the only thing I am seeing right now in this scene is the shadows. And there's nothing else. There's no shaded value. There's nothing else going on. Okay? So this will help with that. Now, with this said, I didn't want to go into this today, but I'm going to touch it. This is for you. This is for you, the users. Okay? And if, we've already discussed it, right now we're looking at a little more 80s style users. Okay? Tron! Where I prefer to go to try to get like a little bit of an outline in here is in the filters. Okay, so we've only been messing with the shadows right now. So if I open up the filters in here, okay, there's a big menu here. There's a lot of things you're going to be able to do. And I'm going to walk you guys through this to simplify this as much as possible for you. Okay, so this F1 here is just filter 1, and then obviously filter 2, 3, 4. So you can have up to 12 filters. And this filter system works like a stacking layer. So just like in something like Photoshop or Paint or something else where you're just in a layering system where one layer is sitting on top of another, that's pretty much what these filters are doing. The first one is laying down first, and then the second filter gets laid over top. Okay? So if I turn this on, right, you can see it's noise that's on. Noise. And then here I'll make the noise be a lot stronger. Okay, so now there's just noise everywhere. So I've got this shadow thing happening with noise. Okay, so from pretty much these color swatches up, it's just, okay, what noise do I want, right? And what do I want that blend mode of that noise to be with the scene? Okay, so you got blend modes, which I'm sure you're all used to. Then you have the noise strength in this case, right? So I'm saying give me the noise 100%, and then there's an opacity. So knock the opacity back. Like I use this one a lot when I was doing renders of I wanted to make something look like it was an old like VHS or something like that, or an old kind of film, and I want to have some graininess in it. So this is where I would use, say, something like this. And then of course I can change the color. So I can make it be red with, that's what I want. I want a red, right? And then I have this ability to change the color. Okay. From the rest down, all it is clipping. So what I mean by clipping is, okay, I have this filter, which by the way, this is in real time. Okay, this is, what I mean is I've done my render, and then I'm seeing everything update in real time, which is awesome. I don't have to sit there and re-render. I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you guys, when we get back out of this, I'm going to show you a real cool way to use filters. Okay? So, again, from pretty much the color swatches, pretty much, I would say actually from the modifiers button here, this noise just doesn't have any modifiers, down is just how do I want it to clip it. So, i.e., I want this noise to only happen on the model. I don't want it to happen to the desktop or the background. So right here there's a mask. So if I go all the way to 1, you can see the noise is now only on the model. Because maybe this is important. Maybe I am trying to do something to the material which gives the model a little bit more different look. Right? So in essence, I've clipped the render to only allow this filter to happen on the model. And then if I go the opposite direction, it's obviously the inverse. Now it's only happening on the document. So this is why I'm saying anything from those color swatches and modifiers down, it's clipping. It's clipping the filter to only allow it to happen in certain spots, right? So the beauty is, because this is devised like this, it looks like a lot. It's really not. To the point of, well, right now the only thing I want it to clip is by the model. But then I can keep adding, layering more clips. I can say, actually, I only want this also go on the shadows of the model. Or I can say, you know what, just go only in the shadows. I kind of want this, I want this noise that's in the shadow. That's what I want. Okay, and then this is where I'm like, it's a little too strong. I'm going to knock down the opacity a little bit and the strength a little much. I just want to see some shadows like that. It's got kind of noisy speck going on in it. Right? So this is pretty awesome. It's all real time for me. And all these are is clipping, right? That's all this is just how do I want to clip it out. Okay, so with that said, the filter, when I click on it, you can see there's a menu of filters, right? And a couple of the filters is lines. So you can see there's an outline edge right here. So that's allowing you to have an outlining edge. Okay, there's different things. There's flat shading, there's outline cavity, right? There's a vignetting ability. There's a bunch of stuff we're going to be able. There's even posterizing. There's negative. There's so many types of different filters, right? So I say outline edge. You can see I'm now getting an outline edge. And remember, right now we're running with a material that has no attributes. It's just straight ambient, and we're looking at the shadows, right? So if we go back and say if we're really trying to make something kind of toon-like with some harsh shadows, I now know if I go into my BPR shadows, I want to turn this down, I'm going to turn this down, and I'm going to re-render, and now I'm going to get harsh shadows, right, with this, and I want them, I'm going to say go full on dark black, right? So you can see now the scene that I'm kind of now making. It's very different. So going on this, now that I have selected outline edge, I'm telling it how to blend, which is replace. I'm saying how strong should that be, right? So I can go the opposite, and now it's white. So all this is going, when I'm going negative, it's looking at this color. When I'm going positive, it's looking at this color, right? So this means I can make this be anything. I can make this be blue if I want to, right? Which could be very cool, right? And then you have a modifiers for this. So you can do external cavity, internal cavities, right? So it just made it thicker. So there's just inner, there's this external, and there's both. Okay? But I can come over here and say outline thickness, right? And maybe I want a little bit thicker outline. Do I want noise? So do I want to make it look like kind of like a crayon or like a pencil look to it, right? So that's the point of this. If I want to do no, I want it more of like a marker, I'd probably turn this noise off so it just gives me a solid, in this case, blue line. Let's switch back to black. Okay, so now it's just give me a solid outline, right? And then I'm going to say give me the interior in and out, right? So now it's even bigger. I'm just going to stick with that. And then now I have a fall off, which is praying how much of the model to really pay attention, right? Right, so maybe I want to use this for a nice thick outline going around the model, right? And that's what this filter is going to allow me to do. And then now I come in here, and then now I can select a completely different filter, right? So now maybe I want to do a different type of line. So let's see, let's do, we can do a cavity. We can do a cavity, I think would be nice, right? So now I have this cavity. I have this bringing the model about, right? So I've got a cavity ability, I've got an opacity happening here, right? And then there's modifiers for this. So I can up the radius, I can play with the fall off, right? So you can see the things that you can start doing. There's a sensitivity ability, inner cavity, external cavity. So you can really start to mess with these filters, right? And find the filter that's going to work best for you depending on what you're trying to get to. But again, the nice thing about these filters is it's real time, right? So anytime I want to change this and go with a different filter, I can click it, and now I've got that, and I can turn it off and turn it on, right? So for me, I like to use the filters to start getting what you were asking with that line work. Okay, so let's get back to the shadows again. So let's up this. Let's put this at 60. Okay, I have affected my material, so let's turn this down to 10. Let's give it some, we need some diffuse in there. Let's give some specularity back on the model. So we'll go at 30. Okay, and then we can render that out. And now we're going to get these harsh shadows. Okay, I changed to having kind of harsh with a little softness. And you can see that filter is still kicking in right here after render. So when you render, the filter then comes in and kicks in. Right? So, the one thing I do want to show you with the filter, which is awesome, okay, instead of doing a filter like this, which is just the filter that we're looking at, this outer outline edge, I'm going to switch to blur. Okay? And I'm going to say give me 100% blur. Right? This will help you guys understanding the real time too. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start clipping this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to, let's add more radius to the blur. So let's open up that blurring ability. So think about when if you guys go into another application where you're going to blur an image, okay? This is what's going to allow me to do that, right? So I've got a really big radius. Okay, so now it's just blurring everything, right? We now know if I mask to 1, it blurs only the model. If I mask to -1, it only blurs the document. So if you look at the shadow now in the document, look how blurry it is. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to blur by depth, right? So in essence, because we're in ZBrush, and because obviously we're using a 3D model, I'm getting a real-time filter that's actually looking at the depth of the model right now. Okay, so what it's looking at, let me move my camera a little bit, get me more in the shot. Okay, it's looking at this depth, finding the closest point to the camera, which in this case is his nose, and finding the furthest spot, which is actually the back of the base right here. Okay, so I want to change that and manipulate that. I want to change that up. I don't like what I'm getting by just the default. All I did was turn depth on. So I just changed the depth to 1. So now I'm clipping this blur based upon the depth. Okay, and you got to say the depth like this. It's just more fun. So what I want to do is I want to take depth A and depth B, and I want to manipulate those. Okay, so these are just sliders that are going to change where the blur is happening. Okay, but what's cool about this is I can actually click and move my cursor and say, okay, I want the blur to happen right there at the chin. Okay, when I start going blurry there, and the back shoulder, I want that to start going really blurry. Okay, so you can see now that back shoulder that's really dark right now from the shadows, and then that back base part is really blurry. So let's soften our shadows again. They're just too dark once again right now. And then let me re-render, and this is going to be a quick one. Right, so you can see his head is coming forward more because that back shoulder is blurred out. Right, and all I've done is I've turned on the blur filter, I've cranked the blur way up. All right, I got my radius turned up right now pretty high. If the higher I go, the more blurry this is going to get. But what I've done is I've told it to clip it by depth. But what I've done is I've clicked on the depth and dragged over. So what I'm doing is I'm setting depth A. Okay, if you're Canadian like me, A. Yeah, you like the gorilla sign? Like no one knew this was a gorilla? It was just me experimenting with text, and then I wanted to see how well it 3D printed out for me as well. So the depth A is saying where do you want to start getting blurry? Okay, so the depth A is the start of the blur. Okay, depth B is in essence 100% blurry. So what we're doing is we're taking the distance between A and B depth, and we're having a slow radial blur happen till it gets to B, and then when it hits the depth of B, it goes 100% blurry. So that's what I've done here. I've told depth A to start getting blurry right about here on the model, right? And then I've told step B at that shoulder. So that shoulder, especially where this guy's sitting to the camera, is sitting further back than obviously the neck chin, right? So if you look at me, depth A, here, let me get on this side. Depth A is here, right? And then depth B is in this back shoulder. So between, this is so hard to do with the camera, between those, right, because it's the opposite, between those is the range that's happening, okay? The range between A and B. So now watch this. All I have to do is, this radius is ridiculous. Just turn this down, and bada bing, bada boom, you got a depth of field, right? And then it's real-time depth of field. So you can see that starts pushing the head of my gorilla sculpt out a little bit more, obviously, right? And this is why we're all using depth of fields anyways. We want the focus to go somewhere. Okay? So both depths in these, but you got to look at the points. They're both -3, but this one's -3.3. This one's a -0.2, right? 3.2, right? So if I now say, hey, let's move this forward up by the eyes, and then let's move B to the chin, right? And we crank up the radius a little bit, you can see then what's really only thing that's in focus, right? So A was here, right? And then I put B here. So in between A and B, it starts giving a slow off blur, and then when it hits B, everything go blurry, right? So you can see this part and this part are a little bit in focus because they're sitting in the same depth as the front of the face. So it comes down to you as an artist, how blurry do you really, where do you want that blur, that depth of field to kick into play? And it's really easy. I liked the chin to that back shoulder, right? Just so it makes my head pop out a little bit more and that chest come forward a little bit more. Okay? So it all is based upon, yes, where the model is, right? Where the model's sitting in the camera, and then the model's depth itself, because every model is going to have different depth to it. Right? So now I've got a render that has some shadows getting soft in there. I've got now a blur filter happening in here, so I got a depth of field. Okay, so I now know what my raise and angle does. The next two sliders that become important to you guys is the resolution and the blur. Okay, so the resolution in essence is your render shadow's quality. So what I normally do, this is just over the years of me rendering inside of ZBrush and experimenting and trying different things. In all honesty, what I do is I go to my document size, and I see that my document size, I look for the biggest size. So in this case for me right now, it's 1479 by 1040. Okay? The shadow looks a bit like something other than a gorilla. Oh, funny stuff. I like it, edit mode. Okay, I got where you're going. All right, so here's the sizes. So the width, 1479. So what I normally do is I start at resolution minimum double the largest document size. That's kind of where I start, right? And so in this case, the default's perfect, right? It's 4096 is more than enough, right? So if we round up the document size of 1500, 3000 pixels would probably be good enough for the quality in the shadows. So I could drop this down and then take a look and see, does that change anything? Nothing really changed. So the thing to understand with this is this resolution, as you can see in brackets, it's pixel based. So this is happening by pixels. And what's next to that is your blur. So this is a pixel blur. So exactly like you would in Photoshop go grab the blur brush and you're blurring the pixels, that's what we're doing here. So we're doing the render, making the shadows, and then coming back and then blurring them and looking at the quality of your shadows in pixels. Okay? Yes, the size of your document will affect, in essence, your performance, in essence, because ZBrush is software rendered. So even though right now my gorilla is only taking up a certain portion of the document, we still need to render we still got to be looking at the whole document, okay, rendering wise. So yeah, if you start making larger resolutions, yeah, you'll start to have a little bit you'll see a little bit of a performance change happening for sure. Okay, so this is just a pixel blur. I very rarely do I change these two sliders at all. Normally these defaults of 4096 and the blur of 2 is usually good enough for me because I prefer to use the filtering system to do other things anyways, right? Because it's just easier to use. Like I can make a crazy blur that only happens on the document with the filter, right? It doesn't touch the model, and to me maybe that's more important for me, is have something like that. Okay, now These rest of these sliders are really kind of options. And so yes, Nakpil will be doing a stream with us after my stream. In fact, I'm going to be in that stream with Geo. So someone's bringing up right now the new ZBrush Masters that we're starting. So we're going to have guest artists. It's kind of almost like a miniature ZBrush summit with one artist at a time. So Geo is going to be streaming tonight, literally like an hour after I'm done my stream. So he goes at 6 o'clock Los Angeles time. So I would stay for that because he's going to be showing techniques that he uses for form and how he gets to where he's going with his sculpts. And I'm going to be in there answering questions and engaging with Geo as well. So thanks for bringing that up. We have many more coming down the line as well. So join us, please, after the stream too. Okay, so these sliders, in essence, from the V depth, L depth, and down, these are things you can definitely play with. I very rarely play with these. So you have an understanding of what they do. Because the reason why I'm taking time to go through the sliders, everybody, is if you notice, if I open up BPR AO, it's the same sliders. If I open up SSS, I get the same sliders. So this information I'm giving you in shadows is actually being used across 3 different parameters of rendering for inside of ZBrush. Okay, so the V depth, as you can see when I scroll over, is view depth. So we're moving the shadows in pixels. Okay, so from the camera view in pixels, right? So if I start going up in this and then start re-rendering, I can get a very different looking render because I'm literally moving the shadows, right, around. And you can see now he's super dark because now the shadows are like, there's a shadow casting over top of him now because I moved the shadow render forward and back, right, based on the pixel movement. So that's all this is doing, okay? Now, the L depth is one that I tend to use. I very rarely use the view depth because I'm not trying to move the shadows based upon the pixels, but I do like moving them based upon the lights. So that's what the L depth is. The L depth, in essence, is light depth. Okay, I'm just going to get a hydrate, people. Get your waters. You can see why we're more than halfway through the stream today. This is why this rendering thing is going to have to probably be 2 parts. Okay, so the L depth is for light depth. So it'd be like right now I've got a light right here on me, okay? Do I want that light to move closer to me, right, or further away from me? Like, where do I want that light to sit, right? So that's what this is. So I can move my light around, right, in which in essence that's going to affect how the shadows are going to lay down in the scene, right, because I'm now moving a light like this, right? So you can see if you go start going extreme, you can get crazy. So I usually start really small. I'll start by like 1. So like in this case, I'm doing a -1, so moving further away, right? This comes in really handy when we start getting into like ambient occlusions and things like that. Okay? So that's all those 2 depth sliders are doing. All they're doing is setting pixel depth to either the shadows based upon the camera and pixel view documents or the lighting based upon pixel, right, movement. Now, you got a gamma control and a fall off. This is just your shadow gamma. I have never needed to change this or found a need to change this personally. Okay, this is really obviously a feature we put in there for depending on what we're trying to do to render. I don't want to spend time really this because it's the more important ones are the ones below it. Okay, which is your max distance. Okay, and your distance fall off. Okay, so if I change this to, let's just say 2, my max distance, and then I do another render, the easiest way to look at this is look at the floor shadows, right? And if you're looking at the shoulder, but the floor shadows, you'll definitely be able to see this. You can see they pretty much they disappear practically, right? They're still there, right? So you can see a little bit of the shadow right there, and the shoulders are still there, but it's not as pronounced. So if we put this back to 0, okay, so this is with the max distance set at 2 right now, what we're looking at, and now we're re-rendering with the default, which is max distance at 0, and you can see how much more is happening on the shoulder and how much more is happening on the floor. So what this max distance slider is actually controlling is, do you want 100% of the shadow to be rendered out? Or do I only want 50%? Do I want 30%, 20%? Like, what's the distance that I want, right? So if we crank this all the way to 10, right, and I re-render this out, this is setting what kind of distance of the shadowing do I want to have, right? And you can see I get the whole shadow now, but the very furthest point of it is kind of fading away, right? So this is a great way to kind of slowly fade off your shadow, which might be something you want to do. Now the slider next to it is, in essence, is controlling that blurring fade off that's going to happen, right? So this distance is set to 2, right? So if we just go, let's just go higher to 6, and we'll re-render, and now I'm changing how the roll off of that distance of the shadows take place, right? So you can see there's less of the shadow now, right? So that, because that distance is a lot bigger, I've made the distance bigger for, hey, where to give me all the shadow to no shadow, in essence, right? So if I go tighter, if I go the opposite, and let's just do a 0.5 as an example and re-render that out, I'm going to get more of the shadow, and just the very end of it is going to start getting, you know, slowly blurred out, in essence, not being rendered out. So that's what this distance slider is allowing us to do. It's allowing us to work with that distance slider to the left and say, how far out do you want the shadow to be at 100%, and then start slowly. So this is a nice, I use this because it just sometimes, like in this case, I'm actually preferring the shadow like this. I like having a little bit of the fade that's going off in the distance here. It's just going to help me even with the depth of field. I'm really controlled now. It's hard for my eye to go even see the shadow. I know it's there, and that's what's giving some of my realism to me, right? Is the fact that I feel like the model is sitting in some space right now. Okay, so those are your shadow settings. You can see how much changing you can have happen just by playing with these sliders, right? So this is going to go into ambient occlusions. So I'm going to switch back to, here, let's switch to a different material. I'm going to switch to a new material, and again, I'm going to make this ambient go to 100. So it's just, it's washed out, right? So when I go to render, the only thing I'm going to get is my shadows. Right, which is this is a great way to really just pay attention to your shadows and see what's going on with your shadows, right? So I want to go here to my render properties. I'm going to turn off shadows, and to the right of that is ambient occlusion, or AO. Okay, and the AO has its own menu, and you can see this menu is exactly the same as my shadows menu, because it is. All these settings are doing the same thing. So in essence, I can actually make my shadows look like an ambient occlusion inside of ZBrush, and vice versa. I can make the ambient occlusion look like shadows, because they're using the same settings. But now I at least I have an understanding of these settings. So let's do a quick render here. And you see along the top, it's rendering out my AO, and there's my AO with the blur, right? Because don't forget, I've got a filter blur on. I'm going to turn off the filter for now, just so we're only looking at him. So you can see this is a very soft ambient occlusion. So right now you can look, I'm doing 20 rays and 360 degrees. Let's see if that is that better. Is that better for the sound? Might be here. Let me see. Maybe it's picking up the air conditioner, which I don't know how it would be doing that, but I'll turn it off for now and see if that works better for us. Okay, so it's 360 degrees. So in essence, I am evaluating the entire scene, right? The minute I change that angle to 360 degrees, I'm looking at the whole scene, right? So I have a rays of 20, there's 20 rays, but what's really going to make the big difference is your resolution. Watch just changing the resolution okay, to this 4096, and then I'm going to render out and watch our AO. So this is what we had by default, and just changing on the resolution, you can see we can get more depth, start getting more definition in our model, just like that, right? Just changing that resolution starts giving me more quality. Then of course, if I say let's triple the rays, okay, and just give more rays to the ambient occlusion, we're going to keep seeing a difference. And this is why I like creating a material with nothing but ambient, so I can see what is this really going to look like. Okay, and I'm going to go 100% strength now and re-render that, and you can see that he's starting to now, the underlining chin in his mouth, especially in his nostrils, right, and underneath the brow is really popping. And you got to remember, there is no material attribute right now rendering this. It is strictly ambient occlusion. So now if we throw shadows on top of this, let's throw our shadows back on, right, and then now let's re-render that. You can see on the top here it says AO shadow, AO shadow, AO, AO shadow, AO shadow, AO shadow. Okay, it's now swapping between rendering buckets of your shadows and buckets of your ambient occlusion, right? And then now there's my shadows with my ambient occlusion. So for me, I like to do this so I can really focus on my ambient occlusion when I want to focus on the AO, and I can focus on shadows when I want to focus on that, right? And then of course now if we go back to a material that makes more sense, okay, so the basic material, and then I re-render that out, there it is now with a shaded material, so there's shaded value to this, okay, with ambient occlusion and shadows, right? And then now what I want to do is, this has got some specularity. So this goes to someone asked about a question about the skin and things like this. I think specularity is so important, right? The spec on something that's more metal, which we're going to start getting into here in a second, should reflect completely different than our skin. You can get light reflection on our skins, but it is very different. So this specularity that I have here, we'll just double it so we can really see the spec, right? And you can see that rim light now is really too strong for me. So I'm going to knock down this a lot. Yeah, that's a lot better. It's too bright at 0.9, especially with the fact that I just changed the specularity up, okay? So we'll let this finish rendering out, and then that way that rim light again is softened up a little bit more. It's not so strong for me. It's not what I want. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit darker with the model too. That'll make that light shine out a little bit more. Okay, it might be a little too dark. Right? This is why if I don't move the scene, I can re-render really fast. The shadows and ambient occlusion are being stored in memory. Right? And then of course now if we throw that filter back on, let's see in its real time, I can see what that looks like, right? So there, I'm starting to get a better quality render that I want to be able to show off my model. Now, coming back to this, right, and looking at this specularity, right below that is a specularity curve. Okay, so this is in essence controlling how tight, right, do you want this, right? Do I want it wide, like this, or do I want it tight, like this? So just a little bit of specularity, right? And then do I want that to get kind of wider, or no, stay really tight? So it's like very, very tight, right? This will be the difference that makes it look like more realistic to where you're trying to go. You're trying to make something like a gumball that has very tight specularity, or you're trying to have something that's a little bit maybe more of a skin tone to it, and then just knock back the specularity some, right? And then now render that out. And then now this is what we have. So this is going to play a big role. Obviously, right now I don't have any painting or color information. I haven't done any detail sculpting on this guy. This was kind of a test I did for when we were rolling out Sculptris Pro. I just wanted to see, hey, can I do something like this, and then use it to 3D print and everything else as well. Okay, so that specularity is going to be important. This is a great example. Again, it's not in rendering world. It's not just, okay, go change that slider and then bada bing, you get a great render. There's really no way around this. Any rendering that when I've rendered in the days of RenderMan or Mental Ray or V-Ray, you got to have there's multiple things you might have to go change to change up your render, right? So I'm just trying to establish the relationship between what's happening with the materials, with the lighting, and then my render settings are coming into play with that. Okay, so I've been using, in essence, lights, okay, that are here, just our basic lights. What I want to do now is introduce you guys to another lighting system, and this is going to open up even more ability for us. This is where you can really start playing with the rendering even more and pushing that render, okay? So there is a light cap here. So this is another rendering system. So the top lighting one was the default lighting of ZBrush for day one that it was coded, and then obviously as we went along we all started doing more advanced sculpts and more things, and we wanted to do more with the renders with inside of ZBrush, so we had to create a new system. So that's what the light cap system does for us. Okay, this is different than matte cap. Matte cap is for material capture. The light cap is obviously for light capture, and you're going to see why it's called light cap here in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to turn off this light, okay, and I'm going to turn this light off, so now there's no lights on. Okay, so one thing I do want to point out, everybody, okay, wait for it, look up here, look up here, look up here, okay, is when you go click on the materials now, you'll see that all the matte caps are gone. They're not gone, it's just we're using that original lighting system to give you the render of the matte cap inside of the material palette. So what I would do is turn this back on, and then you'll see all the materials come back. Now what you're also going to notice is whatever's going on in the lighting here, the standard materials are going to reflect on that. So if I move, say, this down like that, and then I come over here, you can see all the standard materials are reflecting that, right? Because again, the matte cap materials above, they have lighting baked into it. Okay, so we'll put this light here again, right? Now, there is another set of lights here. So there's a new light button. So when I click this, I've just made a new light in the scene. So what's really happening here is we have two lights in the scene, because I've got the light caps has got a light, so there's a red dot here in the middle that you can see I can move around. You can see there's a sphere in the middle. Okay, and you can see that's updating on the model when I move this. You're getting an update on that model, and then this one's still active as well. Okay, so if I'm going to use something like light caps to be my main lighting source, I will come here and knock this light down to pretty much, you can turn it off if you want, or if I do this, right, it's pretty much off, 0.001, and that way my matte cap materials are still there. Okay, so this is important to just understand that this is something that ZBrush is doing. Yeah, I unfortunately, my audio is as best as it's going to get because I can't use my other microphone because something happened to it, so I'm using a different microphone. So I didn't have time to get a better microphone, unfortunately, today. So I apologize for the sound. There's not much else I can do for it. So now that I have this here, right, I got this light. You can see it has this little red dots moving around. I'm moving the light. So same thing like this, and you can see it's also updating there. So then all the controls become available. And so this is why I like this light cap system. We're going to be able to do so much more with this, okay? So number one, obviously you have a strength slider. So if I put this at 0.8, you can see it's just giving you a stronger light, right? So now let's say this is my key light, right, as a way to maybe look at that. So I got this light in the scene, okay? And then this light is casting shadows, so you can see the shadows is a slider now. So instead of just being an on-off button like we have here for these lights, they have like a shadow, right? So you can actually play with, this is almost like shadow strength within the light itself, right? So I have that ability. With it's at 100, it means the shadows are just at 100%. If you're breaking this going lower, then the shadow quality is getting less and less and less, right? So if we render this out, I am now technically really rendering with the light cap light now that's sitting above him and rendering out that. And then it's looking at my ambient occlusion right now and my shadows and rendering that out and going to give me the result based upon the light cap light now. So I'll let this finish rendering, okay? And then there you have. So that's where I'm at now with that render, okay? And then this is a different lighting system, so you're going to get different results for sure. In fact, I like the results I get from the light caps. So just for sake of time, I'm going to turn off the ambient occlusion so that we're only rendering the shadows, okay? So the question Randy's asking, what happens when you rotate your scene? Does the light always stay facing forward? Yeah. So the light's not moving, right? So that light's stationary. It's there, right? So I'm rotating the model, right, and looking at different portions of the model. So the light's staying exactly where I put it, right? There's no change in that positioning where it is. That's where it's going. Okay, so what's next to this is where we start having a lot more fun with light caps, and we can do a lot more. So number one, there's an aperture, which is huge. Okay, so this is like that little crazy little fun drawing I did like an hour ago, where I had the cones. This is now what you would do in lighting. You would have an aperture control that opens and closes the aperture of your light, right? So the lower I go, the more it becomes like a little pin dot. The higher I go, right, the bigger the light's opening up. So, for example, if I want to do some kind of ambient light, I could put this at 360 or 180 and then get an ambient. Like, so I can drop this and say 179, and now there's just a straight ambient happening everywhere. So I might say I want this strength to be very subtle, just give it a subtle bit of light in the entire scene. Maybe something like that, right? It's being lit from everywhere now, in essence, right? So that would be maybe what my first light could do, right? I'm going to go back to, I'm going to put this at 0.8, and let's put this back at 90, and now I have this light. Okay, so you've got a strength, you've got a shadow control, and then now you've got an aperture control. So to your question about the system I'm using, right now I'm using a Threadripper. So it's 16 cores, 32 threads, with 64 gigs of RAM, and the GPU is a 7100 from AMD. But ZBrush isn't using the video card. But right in essence, that's what I'm on. I'm on a machine that's a Threadripper, 16 core, 32 thread with 64 gigs of RAM. It's a second generation Threadripper as well. Okay, so this is now, when we start to get into here is where I like to have some real fun, and this is where I'm going to show you guys some things that we can start doing. So you've got an opacity, okay, which is like, what's the point of this? Isn't pretty much strength the same thing? It's not, okay? And the reason why there's an opacity slider is this. What we also give you in light caps is a diffuse channel and a speculator channel. So you can look at just the specular part of your render and mess with that, and you can look at just as a diffuse section. So in essence, if I wanted, say, make a light that it's only wanting to affect the specularity, I can turn the opacity off here, so the model gets dark, but over which the specularity, you see it's still there because the opacity here for the spec side of the channel is at 1 still. Okay? So you got a diffuse where it's pretty much now off, and you got a specularity where now only the spec is what's being portrayed on the model, right? Nothing else. So then I can say, let's bump up the opacity a little, give me some opacity, and you can see it'll start coming back in and giving you the diffuse, i.e. material shaded, poly paint. You're used to the albedo thing, okay? So Wait, I'm just reading a question. Digital plankton. Unfortunately, I can't talk about future development. The digital plankton asking, are we going to come with a version on an iPad or a tablet? Obviously now with a new operating system, I can use full version of ZBrush on my iPad Pro with Sidecar, and I have. I've tried and messed with it, which is cool to be on that. But unfortunately, I couldn't say whether a yes or no for that. And then Randy, you're asking, sorry, did you mention if there are presets we can turn on and off instead of creating new lighting systems every time? Absolutely. Yes. So you can save out just the lighting by itself, right? So you can see there's a save in and out. But when you guys save a project, everything I'm messing with right now gets saved. So in essence, I can create, this is a great way for, think about this, and let's say I'm an artist working in a studio. I'm going to have daily meetings where, okay, I've been sculpting something for the movie, and then 10 other colleagues have been sculpting another character for the movie. I get in a daily with the director. We put all of our renders up on a board, and then the director gives us maybe critiques, right? If that director chooses not to come by my desk and give me the critique. And this is a real world case, by the way. I was at a studio where obviously the team was working on one movie, but half the team was working on one side of the characters and another team was working on another side of the characters. And they noticed that one team kept getting a lot of critiques from the director, like changing this and changing that and changing it, and the other team wasn't getting as many critiques. And the difference was the team that was getting a lot of critiques was just doing a simple render out of ZBrush, and the team that wasn't getting a lot of critiques had a render scene set up. So what I mean by that is if you guys go to the file and do a save as, you're saving a project. And this is the big difference between a project and a tool. When I'm rendering, I always save a project because it's going to save everything. It's going to save my lightings, what I'm doing with my lightings, what I'm doing with my shadows, my filters, my materials. And as we keep going down the line here, looking at more and more features of rendering, excuse me, it's going to save all that. So back to my example, what happened is one of the supervisors noticed this and go, hey, I noticed that my team's not really getting as many critiques as your team. Let's take the project that my team uses inside of ZBrush to render out all their characters for the dailies. Let's give it to your team and then just re-render and don't do the changes. And let's see if the director says anything. And ironically, what happened to them with that particular person was, all right, they put literally some images up where they didn't change anything on the model just as an experiment to see if they were guessing right that maybe it was just the render. And they were right. The director was like, okay, I love your changes. And they didn't change anything. All they changed was the render, right? So this is where this could become beneficial for you if you're working with a bunch of people and you need to get approvals, or you're trying to do a concept and you really like what you've made here. Save out your project and then you've got it. Because I've seen real world cases, and that was just one that I'm giving you guys. And I've had plenty that I've had along my years of getting in and out of the studios. Okay, so continue on our path here with light caps. So we've got my shadows, we've got my aperture, okay? We've only got about 20 minutes left because don't forget, Geo is streaming with us in about an hour and 20 minutes, and I got to be in that stream as well. So the latest I'm going to be able to go today is maybe 15 minutes past 5 o'clock. So we have an opacity, and then of course you have a fall off, right? So do you want that to be a sharp light, right? So in essence, you can just with the lighting make it look like, instead of doing a material change, okay, you're doing this, right? So you can just play with your fall off in this sense, okay? And then you have an exposure or gamma. So obviously, do you want more exposure to the light? Obviously, that's just washing out the light or making the hot light, right? And then you have the gamma of that light, right? What kind of gamma control do you want to this? Again, these two sliders I haven't found a need to change much. There are situations where I maybe do play with the exposure a little bit, but I prefer to play with my exposure somewhere else, i.e. a filter is where I prefer to play with that. Obviously the color is your light color, right? So when I go red, it becomes red. We already established this, we get it, okay? But then the color The difference here now is the colors also have a mode, right? So this is additive. You can do multiply, right? You can do lighten. So there's different modes to this, right? So this is very different. You didn't have this up here, right? So you can see there's already a lot more controls here. And then me, I like to put a little bit of blue, just a slight blue tint in my there, right? So there's already way more controls. I've already got an aperture control. I've got a fall off ability. I can play with just the diffuse side of my material. I can play with just the specular side of my material with the lighting. Okay. So I know Dr. Pixels is talking, as a freelancer, there's a really nice way to find constant way to present our models and make my scene now and re-render a few models. 100%. It's what I do. Anytime I'm talking to somebody and I got multiple characters or something I want to show somebody, I have a scene and then I just plop the same characters in the same scene. And then it's just equal across the board, right? And then now any critique you're getting is really based upon more the character and not because of the rendering of the scene of itself. Okay, so moving along here, okay? So this is where some fun will start to have happening. Right, so I don't know if you guys how many of you are familiar with a gobo. So gobo lighting, in essence, is pretty much you're just putting a metal plate in front of the light, and then that's going to project what the metal plate is, right? And then people will put filters in real world camera operating. They're going to put filtering in front of the lenses as well and things like that, right? So think about this texture in alpha as that. So the alpha is kind of like the gobo part, and the texture is kind of like a filtering part. Okay, so when I click this alpha, it's going to open that up, and I'm going to click this, and you can see that this now becomes squared. Look how different that just made my scene. Just doing that alone completely changed my scene, right? So I go back and turning this off, boom, right? So as an example, I told you we'd bring this car back, right? So here's my car. Well, it's not my car, but it's a scene. It's a car, right? And I'm going to render this out. So now we are rendering out this car scene with the shadowing and the lighting that we've done. But this is a vehicle. It's hard surface. So what I would want is different type of lighting. I want a different type of reflecting. And for those, I don't know if anybody is a car maker in this stream right now, they're going to have different wants than, say, a person in the film industry or a toy maker, right? Their reflectivity becomes really important to them for a car. And that line that's coming along the car is super important, okay? So I'm going to up the quality. So here's the body. Right now I have dynamic subdiv. I'm just going to add more smoothness to that so we just get a little bit better quality render there. So you can see what we're getting, right? We do have a specularity happening here, right? So for me, I would want that spec channel to be a little different, right? So right now, we've just got a circular scene happening, okay? So what I'm going to do is, okay, this is just the overall lighting that I have. I'm going to make a new light. Okay, so now I've got that one is red dot because that's the light now that I'm highlighting. You can see there's a slider here that says light 2, light 1, and you can see now light 1's highlighted, light 2 is now highlighted. Okay, so I'm going to move this light somewhere else in the scene just to have it somewhere else. Okay, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make this one a gobo light. Right, so now this is a squared light, and you guys should see right out the gate. Right here, there's a line that's starting to happen. It helps selling the car, right? And then this is where, right now, this car's got all the same material. I would definitely not doing that, and that's kind of what I wanted to get in with this stream, but we're not going to have enough time to do this. So this is now a nice gobo light, right? So we'll up the strength a little bit more. Not that much. That's a little crazy. We'll go here, okay? And then I don't want it to be as big. Right, and you can see that immediately, looking at the body and like the windows, really starts to give a shinier look to it, right? Because now I'm clipping the light itself. Right, so now I can also do this. So think about if I am, like right now, as an example, I've got a ring light. It's the popular thing for people that are streamers. It's on me. So I can say, well, I want a ring light. So I would say, here's a ring light. And then you can see the light takes on this ring. And then I can play with the aperture, right? So you can see how different that render is going to look just by just replacing these, right? So I'm going to go back to a squared just because I like what's going on here. And now think about this in the sense of lighting a car to make it look like a car. In a lot of cases, they're going to light it in a studio atmosphere. So you're going to have multiple lights across your scene. So in my case, I got a ring light right above me here. I might have several above me in a studio atmosphere. So I want to replicate that. So here's the easy way to do that. I just say, okay, it's a 4x4 studio lighting. And look at that. That makes a huge difference right out the gate, right? So this light now that I have made here, right, really starts to push and give me that look. So let's go with a little bit darker car now. Let's get the car dark, and let's go ahead and fill that with this color. Okay, and then now let's go back to white, and now you can really start to see that car paint pop. Right, so of course then any color you want for car, you throw it on there. So in this case, I'm just using black. Now I render. Okay, and so right now I've got two lights in the scene. I've just got a basic light that's giving me some shadows. Now I've got this light that's also giving me some shadows. But this particular light's got a gobo. So when the render is done, I'm going to be able to see what the scene is looking like. Right, so you can see the rendering time that I have here. You know, once you start getting around, you know, maybe 15, 20 seconds waiting for render, this is where maybe it'd be worth it to change the SPIX, which is your render quality, to 0. Hold on, I got to cough. So, now that we have this, you can see what I'm getting, right? You can see the better quality of render that I get. And then I've got this depth of field. So now you can see the depth of field doesn't make sense for this car anymore. So this filter that I have on, that was originally for my Gorilla, this doesn't make sense for the car because the car is longer. So I want to come in here and change this. So I'm going to click and say, I wanted to start getting blurry there, and then get really blurry here in the back, right? So now really the further back part of the car is getting blurred. Right, and then I'm going to drop the radius down to 2, so it's not such a big radius. And it's just a subtle depth of field in the back. No, these lights, this is only ZBrush. This has nothing to do with KeyShot. Their whole system's completely different. Their whole system's foundation is based off an HDRI, and now they've been adding lighting stuff. So, but you can also bring an HDRI into ZBrush. That's kind of what I want to get to today. We've only got maybe 25 minutes left, right? So not only this, can you throw like this gobo looking thing on here? So let's actually also make the windows right now. Let's do this. Let's change the windows. Let's up the dynamic subdiv of this as well, okay? So I'm just going to give it more. And not only that, I'm going to change the material of the windows. I'm going to give it this look. So I'm going to say, let's fill with white and this material. There we go. And I'll go back to just a basic material, right? And then white. So now I've got, you know, this render, which you see it happen like that because the only thing I changed was I changed the material attribute and color attribute. So I get boom, like this, right? So one thing that I'm going to want to do to this before I move on to more things with the lighting is these windows, I want them to look like windows. They're not tinted windows. Okay? I want to have windows look like windows. So this particular subtool is my windows. So in the tool palette, in display properties, there are render settings. So this is so you can do subtool by subtool. So it's not a global setting. Okay? So I want now this particular subtool to have some transparency to it. So I'm going to turn on BPR transparency. It's telling me, hey, you got to go turn on their transparency option in render properties. Do you want me to do that? Okay. I'm going to say, yeah, I want that turned on. Right, so what I've done here, going over to my render palette, right, and you can see why I like having kind of both trays open and working this way. So in the render properties, there's a transparent, right, button, so that tells ZBrush to render with transparency, okay? And then there's obviously settings for that here. So by default, the transparency settings are going to look at color and normal based upon the camera. So now if I re-render this, okay, it's got to re-render because I just told it to look at transparency. And you can see when I turn transparency off, we also by default tell this not to cast shadows, right? Because this Windows shouldn't be casting shadows. Like it's supposed to go, light's supposed to pass through. It's not really supposed to cast a crazy shadow. So right now it's just turned off completely, the shadows of this one subtool. So right now this one subtool, which is the Windows, I have transparency turned on, okay? And then I have shadows, and I have the BPR visibility at 100%. So this is an actual transparency slider as well to help you in essence knock down the transparency. So if you want to have different type of transparency in there, you can have that, right? So this is going to help you control that, right? So what do I want for transparency is through here. So this is how you're going to turn something on transparent, but this is going to work with the settings over here, right? It's going to look at these options. It's going to look at the strength. With this slider is a factor of the strength. It's going to look by the color and see the factor based upon the color, right? So this is how you can start render something out with transparency, but it's obviously going to be very much controlled by the settings that we're doing here in your display properties. By telling it to be transparent, make sure to render in transparent inside your rendering itself. Okay, so I'll let this render finish out and then we'll go back into the light caps, right? So what I want to do now is come through here, all right, and I want to say, all right, not only do I want this, let's turn this back to just being one square, and let's make the aperture big again. Okay, so this, in essence, if we do say, we're going to be really visual, I've got a star, okay, and next to this is a texture. So I can click on this texture and assign a texture to this, right? So I can say, I don't know why, but let's put this, and now you can see this light actually has a star shape with an image in there, right? So this is kind of like thinking about, like I said, there's the gobo kind of clipping the light and then filtering. So I see this texturing as a filtering, and then you can even blur the texture. So you click on the texture, load it, and then now see the blurs turned up, so it's blurring the texture. So if you can see in here the image is being blurred. So if I turn on the magnifiers, you can see that's blurring right there. Okay, so if I don't want so much blur, I say put it down to 2. Let's reload the image, and now I can see it's just a slight blur that's happening in there, right? So now this star shape has also an image to it, right? So now I have the ability to have a clipping of the light, and I can even, instead of just only doing color, I can add an image into that, right? So for me, I could switch this back to this, and now this image is being used there, and go back to, I want it 4 by 4, and you can see that image is being repeated along this. And then I can say the aperture, let's go a little bit smaller, and then this is what I'm getting, right? And now I have this ability to render this out, right? So this is what I'm saying. It's different by if I'm doing something hard surface, am I doing something organic? So as far as your question, Hannibal, for creating a material for simulate dark skin, I'd have to sit and play a lot. I don't have enough time. Like, we're running out of time, unfortunately, because I also got to get ready for our next stream again with Geo. Nakpil is going to be joining us for special streams that we're going to be starting as ZBrush Masters. So I'm going to, unfortunately, I can't dive too much in when this render's done. That is really going to come down to a couple things. It's going to come down to your material attributes, right? Along with what else you're going to do. So this material, I don't like this material. It's too strong. Like I like, this is where maybe I would use a matte cap on the light on the windows. On these windows is maybe where I would use a matte cap, right? So I go color, fill object, right? And then this has now got mRGB, so I got material and color information happening here. Okay, now one thing too that I actually also want to talk about, that in the very beginning we started talking about this lighting system here, and right now we're playing with these lights here, right? What's going on in here? I want to do something here and show you guys something. So let me load just a cube, because this is important for you guys as well to have an understanding too when you're dealing with hard surface. So if we look at this cube, right, and we render this out here, let me for the sake of time, let's knock our rays down on the shadows, and for the sake of time, let's turn off anything else that we have on. Okay, and render that out. The transparency can be, if there's a global setting in the render, right? So the transparency options here are a global setting, but that's why each subtool can have a transparency control, right? So that's what this BPR transparency shading, and then you have a visibility. This is per subtool base, right? And then that's working with whatever materials assigned to the model, along them with what your global transparency settings are. Okay, so something that I want to show you that's important, you can see this cube, and if we grab something more reflective, crazy like this, you can see how the cube is like flickering, right? Because what we have here is a very flat surface, right? The planing of this is very flat in all areas, okay? And it's not really getting the reflectivity of this material. So this particular material, right, has some reflectivity to it, right? So there's some reflectivity here, and you can see there's a transparency slider in here as well, okay? So there's reflectivity in here. So how much do I want it to reflect, right? So this shader, or i.e. material, has two shaders, right? So shader 1 is actually what's giving me my reflectivity, okay? And it's just an image that, again, I can pick any image and it swaps it out. Now, because it's super flat in this case, one thing that I can do is tell this to bend the lighting. So this distance, if you notice, if I start cranking this down, you start to see the image, see, in the cube now. So I'm doing like kind of like we're doing like a bend, a light bend with this distance, right? So you can see I'm bending this. So if you're going to render in ZBrush with really reflective materials, this is the only case where you touch this distance slider. Okay, so at 100, it's just going to look like that. It's just going to flicker and flash. Okay? If I start dropping this down, you start seeing that image, right? So in this particular material right now, has that image reflecting. This is my reflecting. So if I grab something like this, you can see it gives me that one. So whatever I click in here, that's what's getting reflected in this material, right? So if we go back to the car, right, you can see it is really shining out. This is like chromed out, right? Compared to having it at 100, we'll change a little bit of things, and then dropping it lower and lower and lower. You can see now on a model the bending that's happening, right? So this is what the distance slider is. This is the only time, again, people, very important. Look up here, look up, look at me, right? This is definitely a Lisa needs braces moment. I do not touch that distance slider unless I'm doing something hard surface. Okay, if I'm doing something hard surface, then that's going to be relevant. Okay, I want to be able to have a little bit of bend maybe in that. Okay, especially if it's that hard surface piece is very cubed shape. Okay, so that's where I would play with that, right? And this is just another example of showing how rendering isn't just one thing, right? There's this material is making things happen for me, right? If I switch to this metal, that looks very different now on the car, right? Because now this material has different attributes to it, right? Compared to this material, compared to this material, right? It's all different. You can see this shiny material was done by a user, right? Has also different attributing to it, right? There's two shaders here to get to the point. And then this is mixing with the color that I've chosen. And in this case, this card right now is a black, right? So if I don't want this card to be black, I want it to be, yeah, like Ferrari type, right? So color, fill object. Well, I'm on the Windows right now. Let's click on the car. Color, fill object, right? So now this car is like a crazy green, right? And then the windows are a different material, right? And then now I'm like, okay, my lighting, I'm not liking this. I want to create some kind of nice lines through there. I want to create kind of a studio atmosphere lighting. So this is where we're going to go into my light caps, all right? And say, okay, I want to have a light in here, and I want to start using these and have this, okay, ability, and then I can up the strength if I want of this. Okay, but here's your problem if you're using a matte cap. So you can see the car's not updating anymore because the material, if you click and drag, you can pick materials this way. So I can click and drag, I can click matte material and click that material. So this is a matte cap, right? So the standard materials is why I stick with those, right? So I prefer sticking with these materials and then messing with the materials, and then now you can see that lighting. So if we're gonna go, let's go back to that crazy green again. You know, let's go with a hot pink, baby, right? So now you'll be able to see this in there. So you can see this is why I tend to stay away sometimes from matte caps, because I want to mess with my lighting and I want to make sure I can see on the model how that lighting is affecting my scene. And I want this, so maybe I want to even push this around maybe to the edge, right? Come to the spec and say, you know what, let's push it right to the rim a lot. You know, maybe it's a little too much to the rim, right? Like this, right? So now I'm on the spec channel, I'm messing with the specularity, right? And I can play with the strength of this. So now this is a super crazy hot light, right? So you can see how crazy hot that light is. And then your diffuse, right? So now I've got a spec and a diffuse, but I can say, you know what, knock down the diffuse part, and you could even turn it off, right? So this is an example of showing I can mess with the diffuse side, I can mess with the specular side here, right? So I have this ability to go through here, okay? So not only that, continuing on this path, not only can I repeat these, I can change the width, right, and the height of these, so I can make them be skinnier, taller, right, bigger, right? So I have the ability here to do that. And then I also have the ability to change the orientation. So now this is me rotating, in essence, the light. It would be like me being the capability to grab the back of the light and then just start rotating it like this, right? So that's what this orientation is allowing me to do, which can be very valuable, right? So this is what I like to start playing with. Now, the last thing that we have time for is this. You can, so just like someone has brought up Keyshot's main foundation, it's not that now with the newest versions, is using HDRI images, right, to create. So we can do that inside of ZBrush as well. So in the tab above, light caps, there's background, right? And just for the sake of time, I'm going to click on texture here, and then there is an HDRI image right here, and you can see this car is now sitting in a library, not a library, in a museum. Whee! Right? And you can see this is just now putting it in a scene, right? So we're bringing some realism in, right? By putting it now in a scene, and now we're going to try and start matching the rendering a little bit more. So this is going to give you guys the ability to bring in an actual .HDRI image. And why we're allowing that is we're going to allow you to use the HDRI image to create the lighting within a light cap. This is why it's called light cap. We're going to capture lighting information from the HDRI image, right? So that's why they're called light caps. So number one, right, as I move this model around, right, when I rotate, the scene rotates. There's a lot of times where I just want to kind of, all right, I want to put the car maybe on this pedestal kind of a thing here, right? All right? But as I'm rotating the model, I want the car to kind of rotate, but I don't want the scene to rotate. So this rotate with object is on by default. If I turn this off, now I can maneuver the car. In essence, now the scene's locked in, right? So now I've got this car sitting here. And when I go to render, because I also have the floor grid on, it's going to render this amazing hot pink car in this scene, right? And then there you have it, right? So it starts to put it in there. Like we're nowhere near at that point yet. Okay, but now because I have this background image, I have the ability to do other things. So there's longitude and latitude, right? So this is just allowing me to maneuver the image. You're going to get seasick now, or image sick, right? You can blur the image, which a lot of people like to do, is just kind of have a subtle feeling like it's sitting in a scene, not all of it. Okay, so you can have a blur or no blur. There's a tilt, which is clearly tilting everything, right? And then you have your rotate with object, right? So, and you have exposures and your gammas. So right now I can even turn the on and off. Okay, so all I've done is loaded an image, and now it's in my background. So now what's really nice is I can tell ZBrush, hey, take the image that's in the background, and excuse me, preferably you want to do this with an actual HDRI. This image is just a JPEG saved out from an HDRI, because loading an HDRI, it could be hundreds of megabytes, so we didn't want to ship it in ZBrush. So this is just an example of showing you what you're going to be able to do. Okay, so I have this HDRI JPEG, and right here you can see there's a button that says light caps. So this is why it's called light caps. We're capturing lighting information from the image that's selected in this background. Okay, and right next to it there is a samples, and you can see when I scroll over it, it says, okay, how many samples, i.e. lights, do you want to make? So when it's set to 3, it makes 8 lights. When it's set to 2, it makes 4, 4 makes 16, 5 makes 32 lights. So again, the big thing with the lighting on the top, right, we can only make 2, 4, 6, 8 lights total with this lighting. With light caps, you can go a lot further. You can go many more lights. Obviously, there's a point where you have too many lights in a scene. Okay? So I'm going to say go ahead and make light caps, and you can see what just happened is if you look at your light caps now, I've got 8 lights. So if I scroll over, you can see there's 4 dots on the top, 4 dots on the bottom. In fact, you can see the one red dot here has that, right, selected, and notice that it's not casting any shadows. You can notice that if I click on this one, it's not casting any shadows, no shadows, no shadows. That's casting shadows. That's casting shadows. So in essence, these are kind of lights working as like a bounce light for us. And then these are like lighting from that big, huge window above us, right, which is super bright. And then if you go in your specularity, you can kind of start seeing this, right? To the point that if we turn on this reflect option now here and click light caps, we recreate it. Now if you go to specularity, you can literally see the image from the background in the spec. So what this is doing is putting the image in the spec now, right? And you've got 9 here now lights, because one of them now is controlling, in essence, the specularity that's helping put the image in the lighting. Okay, so this is why they're called light caps. We're capturing lighting information from an image, right? And right now, it's way too washed out. I want to go adjust the lighting. I don't like what's happening. And it's also, what's a factor here is my materials. Right now, I've got a material that's pretty shiny. It's super pink right now, right? So I got to go and start affecting that to start getting a better quality render. But this is a way that we're going to be able to expand upon this and keep going about this. So this is just foundational items. So unfortunately, I got to get ready for our next stream, which again is our first ever ZBrush Master stream, which is going to be with Geo Nakbil. So you want to join me. He's going to be the guy talking, and I'm just going to be in there just to be there for support. And as you guys are asking questions, things like that, I'll funnel the questions to him, and also get that going and answering questions that I can maybe answer for you guys while he is going. So unfortunately, I need to end this stream because we need to get into the next one. But the next stream starts in 45 minutes. Okay, so don't go too far. Geo is an amazing artist that's worked at ILM for more than 10 plus years. He's been at Valve. He's been at Facebook and been there for 6 plus years now. The next stream is going to be in the same exact location that you guys are in right now. There's not going to be anything different. So it's going to stream to the same channels that we have. It's going to stream to our YouTube. It's going to stream to our Twitch channel. It's going to stream to our Facebook. And then obviously if you're on ZBrushLive.com, it's going to stream to there. So you don't have to go anywhere. You just keep this page open and we're going to stream through there. So I obviously was just giving you guys some foundational things, and now I want to expand upon these and start using all these together. So I think next Tuesday we can do a part 2 of this and just expand upon this a little bit more and answer more questions about the rendering. We can go a little bit deeper now with the materials and what we're doing with the mixing of the materials. So hopefully this gives you guys just some foundational items to work with. But we can go a lot deeper next Tuesday. So every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Los Angeles time, I'm streaming my Did You Know That segments. So we'll do a part 1 here of this for lighting and rendering, and we'll do a part 2 next Tuesday. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to see you guys, for those that can stick around. And then, like I said, in 45 minutes, our first ever ZBrush Masters stream is going to be happening with a Geo. It's going to be a lot of fun. He's going to be really focusing on, he's an amazing artist, but he's going to really be talking about really the basis of form and silhouette and shape and how he gets through that thought process and starts getting into sculpting and looking at subtleness that's in a sculpt. And that's what starts bringing realism alive. So he's going to have an awesome sculpt up that he's going to be working on as we're going. So I'd highly recommend you sticking around if you can. I appreciate you guys watching this stream. Hopefully you took some away. This was a subject that people were asking about for rendering. Thank you for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Next Tuesday, again, we'll do a part 2 of this. By all means, also don't forget, we have streams throughout the week happening. Tomorrow is going to be our man Joseph Drust. Thursday, Solomon Blair. And then again, Joseph Drust on Friday. So obviously, I'm sure you guys have seen that going through there. And then for those that didn't know, we released a patch. So we're in 2020.1.3 for ZBrush and ZBrush Core. Okay, and thank you for joining me. Hope to see you in the next stream. Those that stick around. If not, hopefully I see you at least in my next week's stream. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there. It's time for me to go. I'm out. Bye.